Hey everyone, how's it going? Today I wanted to talk about how construction projects are designed. So when we look at design, when we look at who controls the design, the first thing we want to look at is what type of project it is. That'll typically indicate to us if the project is controlled by an architect or an engineer. Um, Projects where the architect is controlling the design could still have an engineer on the project, but the architect is still in charge. And so, if it's a commercial project, a hospital, a multifamily building, an airport, typically it's an architect that leads the design. They're the one making sure that all the appropriate codes are being followed, that all the other sub consultants are working together, and that the project comes together as one. And very similar, a civil project, so a dam, a highway, a water treatment plant, that'll be controlled by an engineer. And so an engineer who's responsible for, let's say, the design of a water treatment plant may still hire an architect, but it's that engineer of record that reports to the owner. It's the owner that's hired them as a single point of contact, and that architect or engineer will therefore go out to subconsultants. So here's kind of a diagram of what that relationship looks like. Just to reiterate, an owner will hire an architect or an engineer as one point of contact. They're kind of the one facing the owner. They're the ones in theory with all the answers, similar to a general contractor. And that architect will go out and hire a structural engineer or mechanical engineer or electrical engineer to help them complete the design. So what about conflicts? This is common in more so in some industries than others. For example, multifamily construction, the design happens so fast that every once in a while you do see a pretty significant conflict. Let's say, for example, I'm looking at a multifamily building. It has, a concrete suspended slab. Maybe it's 12 inches on the architectural drawings, but 10 inches on the structural drawings. Well, whose drawings do I follow? Typically, when you run into these kinds of conflicts, you look at who controls that design, who's responsible. So in that scenario, it would be the structural drawings that you follow, because that slab thickness has to be calculated by the structural engineer. The structural engineer will stamp the structural drawings, and so you want to follow their what they have drawn. That being said, if there is a conflict in the drawings, if there's something that you're noticing that's not quite matching up, make sure to send an email or get some sort of written communication with the architect. One, to help us get this resolved, but also two, to protect your company from any sort of liability or issues with this discrepancy. So it's really common in TV for an owner to be just completely greedy, make some sort of decision that affects the design and puts people's health and lives at risk. I actually just saw an episode of a TV show where that happened, and the owner was found responsible in a court of law. That's not quite how it works in the real world, but it does beg the question, who is the architect or who is the engineer loyal to? If the owner is paying the architect for a design and the owner wants the building designed maybe contrary to what code specifies, can the architect say no? And the answer is yes. An architect and engineer, if they're licensed, are obligated to follow a code of ethics. They're obligated to follow any sort of calculation or design criteria or code requirements. And when they stamp their drawings, when they seal and approve their drawings, they're effectively stating with their name on it that the drawings are up to code, and follow every rule that they're supposed to. So the architect does have the power to go back to an owner and say no if the owner wants something. That all said, generally an owner is not going to ask for something intentionally illegal, and usually they're hiring an architect or an engineer to as a consultant, right? To give consulting advice on, hey, here are your options. Here's what you can do. Here's what you can't do. But generally, an architect and engineer will not just do what the owner tells them because they're getting paid. They have to follow a certain set of standards first, and then what the owner tells them second. So as I mentioned in the previous slide, an architect and an engineer have a stamp. They generally have to stamp their drawings before they get issued for construction. But what does that mean? So if you see a stamp on a set of drawings, it essentially means that the drawings, to the architect or engineer's knowledge, is good to go. The structure is safe. The architectural renderings follow all the appropriate fire codes and occupancy codes. What you'll notice is that every trade has to stamp their drawings, and so a plumbing set of drawings will be stamped by a mechanical engineer. A structural set of drawings will be stamped by a structural engineer. Architectural drawings will be stamped by an architect, and then the overall design will be stamped once again by the architect, or covered by the architect. And so there's obviously lots and lots of liability with designers stamping drawings. If you've ever had the pleasure of watching an architect or an engineer stamp a set of drawings, it's pretty interesting. They'll usually want to review everything many times just to make sure that they're covered, because ultimately they become liable if there's an issue with the design. So on the construction side, especially on the estimating side, and this is the world I live in, we're usually in a hurry to get completed drawings. It's not uncommon to get drawings with not as much details as we were hoping. And that's because drawings have to go through so many phases, and I'll make a separate video on this, but typically you'll get drawings in kind of this sequence. Sometimes drawings will be approved behind the scenes between the architect and the owner without all going to the contractor. It just depends on how the owner wants to bid their job. But for the first phase you have are called SD drawings, or schematic design, and that's really just kind of floor plans and maybe elevations. That's just a really general high overview of, hey, Mr. Owner, is this what you wanted me to design? The second phase is a design development, or DD, set of drawings. That's where you start getting more into like specific systems, and so the layout is good, the elevations are good. Now we're determining, do we want a central air conditioning system? Do we want split units? Do we want one type of framed wall over the other? Do we want concrete or masonry walls for your core wall? Things like that get determined in the DD set of drawings. And I should mention, they also come in 30, 60, and 90% complete sets. And that just comes down to how much time the architect has to develop these. Some things get hung up because of others. So for example, maybe your slab openings are affected because your mechanical design has to get finalized. And so you'll see these 30, 60, 90 set of drawings released within a general scope or phase. So the next phase you have are the construction documents, the CDs. In theory, you can start building off of these. I would recommend not to do that until your stamp is on those drawings. But that's where you're going to have a lot more detail. You're going to start seeing specific wall thicknesses and types. You're going to have hopefully a really good set of specs that come out. And then after that, you're going to have an IFP set of drawings, which is issued for permit. Usually the city or the state or whatever the jurisdiction is wants to review the drawings and approve them before you can start construction. And that all said, once they get approved, then you get an IFC set issued for construction. And that's all I've got. Thank you so much.